am the person who is the most excited, passionate, interested in your period on this planet that you will ever meet.
The anger and the tears and the cultural lie that this will suck and be really hard and there's nothing you can do and that's your fate as women.
The knowledge of what I knew was going to be in that book was freaking me out, to be really honest with you.
I uncovered this Infradian rhythm and this whole cognitive shift over the cycle because it was a bunch of dudes who were describing it and putting a plan together. You are manufacturing an endometrium out of nothing every month. You give birth and create things out of nothing, out of your ideas all the time. Those things are absolutely connected.
As the mental health girly, this is one of the most critical pieces to me.
To cancel my hot Pilates class because I'm in my luteal phase, I'm like, oh, we're not going to that.
You need to be having a healthy cycle, period. I always intend that pun. And you want to be serious about it. It's the springboard from which you get to do shit in the world.
Yeah.
Women have lost so much time just because we don't know how to take care of our hormones. It keeps me up at night.
To anyone watching this on YouTube, I would like you to not perceive me today or listening to this because I am sick. And if you can't tell by my voice, like, please just do not perceive me today. And it's just for the intro. I promise for this episode, I'm fantastic.
It's a struggle bus today. And the
Yeah, a little
irony of doing the intro and editing this episode while I am in the biggest period fog of my entire existence.
Yesterday, you were cracking me up when we were texting about that.
I was not here.
It was so
I was
funny.
not here
But I
even
haven't
now.
been either. You know, I've been sick. You've been in a period haze. We've just kind of been two brain cells rubbing themselves together. Thank God our guests carried this episode.
I mean, yeah, I need to stop talking because I want them to know what's happening today because it's very important. And this episode is so chock full of juicy, delicious information. But anyway, today's guest, which Meta will tell you all about, is somebody that we have wanted on the podcast since the inception of Thoughts May Vary. And I know we've said that before, and it's always true, to be fair. Whenever we say that, it's true. But this woman, her book, I can't even begin to explain how much it changed my life. I read it in 2020 during the pandemic. We talk about the whole story in this episode, but it was one of those books that fundamentally shifted something in me. And I recommend it to every single person I know. And that's why we were just so honored because it's such a blessing to have her on to be able to share just like an ounce of her knowledge with us because we could have, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but we talked for a minute. So let me just trust me when I tell you that this was just like the tiniest introduction into the magic that is today's guest. Tell them who we have on.
Alisa Vitti is on the pod today, a woman that's been on our bucket list truly for so long. So let me tell you a little bit about her because this bio is robust. Alisa Vitti is a woman's hormone and functional nutrition expert and pioneer in female biohacking. She's the best-selling author of Woman Code and In the Flow, one of Gabby and I's favorite books, which if you've been listening to the show before, you've absolutely heard us mention many, many times. Alisa is the creator of the Cycle Syncing Method, a female-centric diet and lifestyle program that leverages hormone patterns for optimal health, fitness, and productivity. As the founder of flowliving.com, she's built the world's first menstrual healthcare platform that helps women around the world put their period issues like PCOS, fibroids, endometriosis, and PMS into remission naturally using her highly effective Flow protocol and Flow Balance supplements, which I've since bought since filming this episode and have already loved, but that's for another conversation. Alisa is also the creator of My Flow Period app, our favorite app of all time, the first and only functional medicine period tracker designed to help users eliminate symptoms and schedule their lives according to their cycles. A graduate of Johns Hopkins University and the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, Alisa's work has been revered far and wide. She's been featured everywhere from the New York Times to Women's Health. She serves on a myriad of wellness councils. She's a regular contributor to Women's Health Media. She's an advisor to several tech startups. She's spoken at huge events, including South by Southwest, TEDx, and Google. And she regularly trains women in the workplace on how to use her cycle syncing method for greater creativity, productivity, and well being at work. And I just want to say, this episode truly, of course, is part one, but is really, really empowering and life changing for anyone that has female hormones. And I mean that in the most inclusive way as possible. We briefly touch on how cycle syncing is gender affirming care and how this is just a supportive amount of knowledge that truly like this needs to be sex ed in public school for everyone.
Yeah.
So whether or not you even have female hormones, listen for a friend or a loved one, listen for yourself to figure out how best you can work with your body. Like this is the empowerment biohacking tools that needs to be public information. And so we're so grateful that Alisa came on to give our community this knowledge and this information and equip us with the tools to take charge of our own health.
And not only do we get all these tools and this incredible knowledge, but Elisa was so generous to give us a code
I
to give you
know.
guys for 30 days off of trying Flow Living. The code is TMVX My Flow. The
We'll
link
put
will
it
be
somewhere.
the link. I'm like the link in the description as if this is YouTube, but it is on YouTube too. So the link will be in the show notes and in the YouTube description with the code, the link, all the good stuff. Like Meadow said, we're so, so grateful to Elisa for taking the time to, by the way, have a 2-hour
I
conversation with
know.
us. Okay. But do not worry, we will not make you sit through that in one go. We've split up Elisa's episodes into 2 parts. So today you will enjoy part one, and next week you will get part two. So without further ado, please enjoy part one of our conversation with the amazing Alisa Vitti.
Are we going to do the thing?
We're going to do the
Let's
Let's do
get
thing.
the
into
thing.
Okay.
get into it.
I don't know how many more times I can tell you how excited we are that you are here.
Well, it's always a nice way to start.
Yeah.
This has been a bucket list. I'm like staring at our bucket list, and you've been on it since the inception of this podcast. Both Meadow and I read your book back in 2020, and we'll speak on it more, but it completely changed both of our lives. I recommend it to everyone I know. A friend recommended it to me. And when she saw that you were coming on the podcast, she called me and was like, it's finally happening. And I was like, no.
Oh.
So we're just very grateful. Welcome to the
I am
podcast.
so thrilled to be here. I'm like so excited to talk to the both of you. I love the show. And I really, really think we're going to have some fun discussion. So I'm curious what you're going to ask.
Okay, well, let's start by asking you the first question that we ask all our guests, which
Mhm.
is, what are you unpacking? And you may take it however light or deep, whatever first thing comes to mind.
Oh, I am actually in the midst of
Ooh.
unpacking a couple things. Right now, I mean, I did this in my 20s, and it actually kind of was a part of the, let's say, the psychological work that I did that led to developing the cycle syncing method,
Mhm.
and why I felt that it was a practice that I needed to uh, anchor myself in the feminine energetic in an environment that is just so masculine and patriarchal. But, that was the exploration that I did in my 20s. And now, in my mid 40s, I'm looking at that again. And, life is spiralic, right? So you
Mhm.
you you revisit things with a new perspective. So in this new perspective that I'm in now, I'm looking again at what is that heroine's journey.
Mhm.
How do we as women really embrace feminine energy? What does that mean in our day-to-day lives? How is that helpful, especially as we're in a perimenopausal phase and hormones are changing? And how can that be leveraged as a tool to support the neuroendocrine transition that takes place during this
Mhm.
15-year period of time, and what is needed? So I'm like deep into the
Mhm.
unpacking of that. I'm rereading a couple of books. If you have not read Madeline Miller's Circe,
Oh, it's fantastic.
it's
I
I have
like
not yet.
love that book.
life changing. But I
So good.
was so moved reading that book. I mean, I think I read it a decade ago. I don't. Whenever it came out, I read it. I didn't read the Song of Achilles. I
It's
something
also fantastic.
Also, I'm sure
So
it's
good.
fantastic, but I something about that book cover, it just drew me right in, and then the whole experience of reading a heroine's journey of
Yes.
her going and doing the inner work to reclaim her sovereignty and her I don't
Mm,
know, it was very moving, it was very healing to read a story like that because, you don't there aren't
Totally
that
agree.
many.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm unpacking right now. It's really an interesting time. Being this stage of life is so powerful. It's so juicy. Um, there's so much to unpack with your psyche, with your sexuality, with
Mm.
your body. And I'm kind of diving in as I'm preparing on, what I'm going to be putting into the next book. So yeah, I'm in it. I'm
Has
and
something
really in,
surprised you or stood out to you or caught you off guard in that process?
it's really fun. I used to teach a lot of, I still teach a lot about how sexual energy can actually become enhanced, improved, more intense in this midlife transition if you take care of
Mm.
yourself properly. Of course, that was something that I was teaching from an academic perspective
Mhm.
prior
Mhm.
to actually being in this place. And now being in this place, having been cycle syncing for decades, and seeing the net effect of what that is how that's benefiting me, experiencing that sexual energy surge has been like, well, I know that I know that it's supposed to happen, but then when it actually is happening, it's like, wow, that is so neat. Because in your reproductive years, sexual energy will ebb and flow a little bit more
Mhm.
cyclically, right? As you
Mhm.
experience that. As you transition, it can be something you experience more constantly. And if you take care of yourself, if you don't take care of yourself, when you get to this sort of mid 40s situation, you're hitting a wall. You
Mhm.
hear women complaining about all the symptoms, and then their anxiety, depression, body issues, pain, suffering, and then all of a sudden you have to, take hormones. There is a different path, and when you take the different path, there's some fun side effects and benefits to enjoy. So yeah, that's definitely a fun one.
You said something in there that really piqued my interest. I mean, a whole lot of things, but you said the phrase reclaiming your sovereignty and
Mm.
how you felt like there's not that many books that express that. That's what I felt when I read your book for the first time.
Correct.
Because when I read In the Flow, it was a few months into the start of the pandemic, and I had been told about it, as I mentioned, by one of my best friends, and I had been putting it off because I knew I wanted to get off birth control. I'd been on birth control for 8 years. I'd been diagnosed with PCOS at 16, and at the time I was 22 or 20, sorry, 24. And I'd been putting it off because I was like, I'm scared. I'm freaked out. I don't want to read. I don't want to. The knowledge of what I knew was going to be in that book was freaking me out, to be really honest with you.
Mm.
And when I read it, although I was initially met with like a whole lot of anger, a whole lot of frustration, a lot of tears, it was the first time that I felt as if I had that power over my own body and the way that I wanted to live my life. The work you do is so important. And I would love for you to just give the readers a bit of a taste of what that catalyst moment was for you where you knew that this was going to be the work that you had to do in your life.
Well, first of all, I'm so honored that you would feel that way about my book, and it's unendingly moving to me what's been happening over the past 3 or 4 years since the book came out, where we have like this global movement on social media. So many
Mhm.
women are, sharing their cycle syncing journeys, and and I think it has to do so much with that experience that you had, Gabriella, of like, connecting to your biology with information and truth, and that just really changes you. And it's like
Mhm.
this big missing piece that we've all been having, this blind spot we've all been walking around with. And to be given like the keys to your own, kingdom is, it's like a nice feeling, and I think we all just collectively needed that. And I'm glad that it's resonating with so many of us. When did I know this was going to be my life's work? That's a massive question. I will take it way back then, since you want the answer,
Yeah.
which is
Please.
uh, the first time. So I was raised by immigrant parents who were who decided consciously to take like a more sheltering approach to my
Mhm.
upbringing, not like in some like extreme way, but when I would ask, they would kind of joke like, "Oh, where do babies come from?" They're like, "We grew you in the tomato garden." Like they just didn't want to touch
Yeah.
certain subjects, which is really interesting. And anyway, but fast forward, by the time I knew nothing. By the time I got to 6th grade, when we had like that
Mhm.
day,
Mhm.
sex ed class
One
day,
day. Yeah.
I, I
Mhm.
I had no idea what I was walking into. Everybody else probably knew. I such a memorable moment. They sit us down. They're like, "Okay, girls, we're going to teach you about menstruation." I'm like, "What are they talking about?" Never even heard the word.
Wow.
Before that, and they just kind of explained this thing that was going to happen once a month. And I remember feeling like this buzz. I can still feel it now, like this buzzing in my body. I was going to jump out of my skin with excitement. I was looking around at my friends like, did you know that? Like I was short circuiting. I was,
Yeah,
picture me
yeah.
at 12, like super chubby with like a really short haircut. My
Oh,
hair was straight at the time. And I had the claw, like I had those bangs. I was
yes.
Yep.
trying, didn't
Yes.
work. Anyway, and I
Yeah.
had like rolled up champion sweatshirt, like I was in it. Okay. And
Yeah.
I was gobsmacked. And we left that class. I was like high on this information. I grabbed my three best friends, Kristen, Katie, and Sarah, and
Shout out.
we're not friends anymore, but at that
Oh,
time we were really close friends.
still wherever they are.
We sadly lost touch with them. But I grabbed them and I was like, we are starting the period club right now. It's happening. I'm starting it.
Yes.
And they were like, what do we do? I'm like, there are two goals of the period club. First goal, we have to guess who's going to get the period
Yeah.
first. Second is like Fight Club. Second
Yeah,
goal
yeah,
of the
yeah, yeah,
period
yeah,
club is
yeah.
randomly throughout recess, somebody is going to maybe think they got their period because we didn't know what that would feel like. And we would all go to the bathroom with her,
To check.
Oh.
wait outside the stall to see if she got it, to like, just be there for her. And that was the period club. That's how it all got started. I am the person who is the most excited, passionate, interested in your period on this planet that you will ever meet. It has never,
Love
it
that.
is only intensified since then. You can imagine how spastically energetic I was hearing about that for the first time, starting a period club at 12. That's only gotten worse over the decades, to the point where
That
I've
is
had to write a couple of
incredible.
books about it. you know, I think it's been seasoned with, I was planning to become an OBGYN originally. I went to Johns Hopkins with the intention of doing that and had this experience of my hormonal breakdown around that same time,
Mm.
where my weight skyrocketed. I didn't menstruate. All the friends, I predicted in order who was going to get their
Of
period
course you did.
accurately, by the
Of
way.
course you did. Yeah.
Well, I've always had a knack for seeing estrogenic impact on faces. I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have known that's what it was. But a couple of years ago, I ran into a dear female founder friend in New York City with her co-founder on the street. We hadn't seen each other in a while. And I looked at one of them and I said, oh, congratulations.
Did she not know and you knew?
No, she knew. She hadn't told her like best friend co-founder yet. And she looked at me and she was like, so it's funny. So I did get that correct. I was dead last. I didn't think I would be as last as I was to get my period. I was a few months shy of my 16th birthday, and it was a mess. And I menstruated maybe like 4 more times, a couple of which were chemically induced with synthetic progesterone. Nobody knew what was wrong with me. That whole experience of going through a hormonal problem that was so all encompassing between the weight and the terrible cystic acne all over my face, chest, and back, not getting a period, the mental health side effects of that, the anxiety, the depression, the insomnia, the fatigue, the brain fog. It's so negatively impacts every area of your life. That made me really passionate. And then my whole, healthcare journey of being gaslit and then being told, oh, there's nothing to fix you. And I really felt clear in that moment that I needed to use all my powers and talents and knowledge and abilities to research things to figure out what to do to improve the endocrine function of the body, and then to build a platform to help other women, because the way that I felt was just so unacceptable, and that medical experience was so
Mhm.
substandard. That's the other seasoning. And then the third one is sort of just this feminine, energetic inquiry. Like, what does it mean to be an embodied sovereign woman in this environment? And how do we practically do that? Not in the like, let me wear a caftan and move to an island where, I'm not connected to, whatever quote unquote normal life is. But how do I anchor myself in a practice that nourishes me and this feminine essence. What does that mean? You know, I'm not a very woo-woo person, so I was really trying to look for something very practical. So those three things, to answer your very special question, Gabriella, those are the three things that are like my origin story of like, you know, why I am a period superhero. Those are the origins.
Oh, I love your enthusiasm so much. It's contagious. And
That's that I hope it is. I want you to be
it
a
really is.
like an infinitesimally infected by this enthusiasm, just so that you can start to take care of yourself
Yes.
properly.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
all.
Let's go back to that classroom because I think all of us probably had that same classroom experience where everything starts with the like Gabby said, the anger and the tears and the cultural lie that this will suck and be really hard and there's nothing you can do and that's your fate as women. I mean, I just remember reading that. I don't even think it's your first chapter. I think it's the introduction where you kind of unpack the patriarchy from a biological perspective. And I remember just crying to my husband and being like, this needs to be international curriculum. And this is a way that yeah, the patriarchy is insidious and it just was so
It is.
liberating and it
Yeah.
hurt on the way out, like Gabby said, but then it just made me feel so free and empowered. And so I want to start with that cultural line and pack that to set the tone of this conversation.
And it's mythological because
Yeah.
it's not scientifically based in
It's
fact.
crazy.
You know, it's just and so listen, and I think I spent some time in chapter 10 addressing the emotional reaction that we can have
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
being presented with this truth. The good news is we don't have to linger in the unsettled, unhappy place because we then have a path, you know, with practice, with the cycle singing practice to really reclaim whatever period of time has been lost. You can reclaim it and it's beyond, you know, whatever you think is possible. It goes way beyond just having a better cycle, right? The more you
Mm.
practice the method, the dividends are really hard to quantify, you know, but just the very like table stakes is like, yeah, you're going to have a better period. But the narratives, yeah, they're pretty toxic. Um, Saying that your period is a curse, saying that it's going to be, you know, painful. That's not accurate. You know, I mean, I can unpack for you the prostaglandin impact on, you know, uterine activity just to explain to you that, you know, nature hasn't programmed you, in fact, to be in
Mm.
pain. If it had, we'd have, so there are three prostaglandins that control uterine activity. Um, if the myth is true that you as a female are designed to suffer, then you would have either all three prostaglandins causing uterine contraction, which would equal pain, or you'd have at least two of the three prostaglandins controlling uterine contraction, which would equal pain. But you only have one out of the three that cause the uterus to contract, and then two of them cause uterine relaxation. Why? Well, nature, and especially the female body, is extremely efficient and elegant. And so you just need a little squeeze and then a lot of relax to get the endometrial lining to be excreted every month. The only reason why we have pain is because we're eating the wrong dietary fats that cause the increased production of the prostaglandin that causes that contraction and the suppression of the other two. So, you know, let's just knock that myth out of the
Mhm.
equation right then and there. Other things like, oh, if your mom had fibroids and your aunts and you're going to have them, yes, you may have a proclivity to develop those things. But if you know how to manage estrogen metabolism in your body and your liver and your large intestine with dietary changes that you'd be making in the cycle syncing method, you do not have to develop fibroids. You know what I'm saying? These are not handed down curses. These are just without proper understanding of how your body works, how can you prevent? How can you take care of it? How can you do anything to change what has gone on before with
Mhm.
your in your family? You can't. So, you know, it's but beyond that, you know, I have a daughter who is 9 and she'll be 10 in October.
Mm.
Obviously she's like my fun experiment of how do I reverse engineer like a
Mhm.
biohacked pubescent experience for her,
Yeah.
right? Which started, by the way, in utero with the choices that I was making, what I was eating, how I was taking care of her while she was gestating. But since the jump, since she's been out of me, it's been very intentional what I feed her,
Mhm.
how I've been developing her gut microbiome, but also how I teach her about her body. So when it's, and I layer this on, and I think this is a way for moms to think about, you know, how do we rewrite the script of how we talk to our daughters? Well, you don't wait till they're 12 to talk to them about this. You want to teach body literacy and sovereignty early on. So that started with us with two things: looking at bowel movements when she was probably, I don't know, 4 and 5. I would be like, okay, how's your poop today? She's like, what do you mean? I was like, let's look at it. She's like, we're going to look at it. I'm like, yeah, let's look at it, you know? And
So
she'd be
cute.
like, what are we looking at? I'm like, well, I said, there's three ways. I kind of break it down into things. I'm like, well, there's three
Yeah.
things it could be. We want it to look like a kind of like a banana shape, you know? But if it looks like little balls, what do you think it means? And I would just teach her how to interpret biomarkers that she could see, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
then she would link that to dietary and lifestyle habits. So if we saw a lot of those little dinosaur balls, as she would call them, she knew that she had to have more water, more vegetables, but also to take her probiotics and maybe some magnesium the next day.
mm.
So just
Wow.
at 5 and 6, having these conversations. Then when she was developing, she has some sensitive skin. And sometimes she has a little bit of stress response because she grew up in Manhattan. So when that comes up, we talk about it and I say, what do you think we should do? She's like, well, I'm going to work on I've taught her to separate facts from feelings and we like navigate that. But then she's like, but I should take more of my fish oil. I'm like, yeah. And what happens when you take more of your fish oil? Well, I feel better and I feel less of these feelings. I'm like, great. So let's take some. So it's never like this pressure, like you have to take it, but it's
Yeah.
always this sort of relationship. And then when it came to menstruation, she would start asking questions about like, well, where do babies come from? I was like, oh, I hadn't planned anything, but I was like, I think I'm ready to answer this question. Like, so I
Yeah.
gave her like this great explanation. I was super happy about it. I was like, there's an egg and a seed, and they come together, and a baby can grow inside the nest of a mother. And she's like, what's the nest? And I was like, this is the beginning of the
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
around the cycle. So over the years, since the age of 5, I've been explaining this like nest process. And then as she's gotten older, we've had more um, specific conversations about menstruation. She now knows about her infradian rhythm and the cycle, and she's
Mm.
really excited about the fact that this is going to start for her in a couple of years. Sometimes she'll come and say, so how many more years do I have to wait? I'm like, okay, it's like probably 2 more years, 2.5. And then when you start that, I will help you learn what to do in each of the phases to take care of yourself. So just really getting her enthusiastic,
Mhm.
curious, and having built upon a practice of um, checking in on her body's communication with her and her being in a practice of responding to that compassionately is the sort of path I've been taking with her. And I'm excited to see, it's not going to be without, I'm sure, some fun challenges along the way because it is puberty, but to see if we can, proactively create a pubescent transition that is very low symptom. And I think that's
Mm.
very doable if you just put a lot of planning and thought into it.
I mean, your daughter is extremely lucky. When I read your book, I had no idea. I mean, I was 24 years old. I was college educated. I had no idea what an infradian rhythm was. First of all, that
Mhm.
shouldn't be dependent on my education, period. A.
Period.
B, it was insane that I didn't know what it was. And I had no idea that there was a way that I could optimize my life using my hormones. And it's something that I still really struggle with on a personal anecdote level of just because my PCOS is still whole other combo.
All right. Well, we got to sort that out.
I was wondering if you could share a little bit with us just more about that cycle syncing method and how we can use our hormones to our advantage and to sort of systemize our life and operate in flow with them instead of against them.
I had first encountered this idea of like the flow state when I was
Mhm.
taken to a Tony Robbins event like
Oh my
decades ago.
gosh. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did the firewalk. The
You
firewalk was
did?
my favorite thing. I had never, I thought it was so nuts that we were going to do this. And then I did it and I was like, "Can I do that again?" That was really neat.
Awesome.
Because it really was profound, the people who were able to, focus, seeing that there was, like, this one conversation, like, "Okay, if you just optimize your day-to-day calendar and you do the same thing every day, you will get everything you want out of life." And I was like, "Well, I want everything that I want out of life, so I am gonna try to do this." And I could not do it. And I am a person who likes to accomplish things. And I found it really frustrating. And it wasn't later until I sort of uncovered this infradian rhythm and this whole cognitive shift that we experience over the cycle, an energetic shift, where I was like, oh, no wonder that never worked. And no wonder I couldn't be in this peak flow state the way that they were describing it, because it was a bunch of dudes who were describing it and putting a plan together that was really optimized for their reality and their hormonal ecosystem, even though they did not realize that's what they were doing. That's
Right.
the insidious nature of gender bias. It was just like, well, that's the fish tank that they were swimming in, and so it was perfectly normal to optimize everything for that circadian only clock. But in my research, I uncovered that women have a second biological rhythm, this infradian rhythm. And I thought, my God, we need to, and it affects so many systems of the body, your metabolism, your brain, your immune response system, your stress response system, your sex response system, your menstrual cycle. We needed a way to support that, just like you have ways that you support your circadian clock, right? That you just take for granted. They're so ingrained in our day-to-day care plan. You don't even think about the fact that you like wake up with the sun and go to sleep when it's dark, and you try to not be in front of the blue light all day. And you just, you're doing things to protect this circadian clock. We have to do the same thing with this infradian clock during our reproductive years. And if not, the impacts are really massive. I mean, 80% of women will have a hormonal imbalance at some point in their lives. That's a massive number. When you look at the cohort of men, 80% of them are not having a hormonal problem. But so almost all
Wow.
women are having a
Yeah.
hormonal problem. When I looked at that, I said, what are we missing? And it was that we were totally dysregulating and disrupting this infradian clock. So after, all the research that I did, it just became obvious that we needed to organize kind of calorie amount, food type, workout type and intensity, and even the things that we're working on to really align with what's happening in each of these cycle phases. So you have 4 phases. You have, the follicular phase, the ovulatory phase, the luteal phase, and the menstrual phase. And they each have like a distinct hormonal pattern and a distinct impact on your metabolic speed, your resting cortisol rate, the way your blood sugar is like more or less stable throughout the day, cognitive areas of focus, um, immune response, all of these things. So when we use food and lifestyle strategically, it becomes really easy to take care of this. So with the food piece, you're really just, again, modulating calories in the first half of your cycle, follicular and ovulatory. Your metabolism is slower, so you can eat fewer calories, right? The other side of that equation is estrogen is rising. And if you're somebody who notices, like, gee, every ovulation I break out in zits, pimples, something, or my breasts are tender, or I'm very moody, that's just an indicator that you need to be using that food that's in the chapter 4 food chart. You want to use those foods strategically to help your body metabolize estrogen more efficiently during that time when estrogen has like a super surge in those short
Mm.
span of days. Um, and then in the luteal phase, things shift. Your metabolism speeds up. Why does it speed up? Well, again, the body's so efficient, but in order to 3D print that endometrial lining every month, no big deal. You're just making an
Right.
organ fresh, no
Yeah.
biggie. In order for you to do that, your body has to more rapidly extract nutrients, micronutrients from the food you're eating. So your metabolism speeds up, which means your blood sugar is more vulnerable to be destabilized if you're not
Mm.
careful with what you're eating and how you're eating. So in the cycle syncing method, you're eating more calories because studies show you need 279 more calories per day to make this organ. But then also you're using carbohydrates strategically, slow burning carbohydrates that are high in fiber, as well as cooked leafy greens, which are also high in fiber, to help with keeping blood sugar stable, but also to help with keeping bowel movements regular, because estrogen is still also a factor here and a player. And we want to promote the body excreting that through the bowel movements. But with progesterone showing up in the luteal phase, it slows down the transit time in the gut, which is why a lot of women experience like premenstrual constipation, which you need not have. Once you start cycle syncing, you'll be going every day. You may have, different volumes, whatever, but you can absolutely go to the bathroom every day, and you should. Then it was really fascinating to look at the studies that talked about micronutrient depletion patterns in each of the phases of the cycle. And we actually know that in the menstrual phase, women are more apt to be depleted in iron and zinc and other micronutrients. So in the cycle syncing food logic, we front load the diet at this time. Appetite starts to go down as soon as the bleed starts. So you don't have to eat as much, but you're eating very high calorie, high nutrient dense foods like animal protein or sea vegetables or fattier things. So you're modulating calorie intake, but also using food strategically to help with what's going on with estrogen, progesterone, and micronutrient shifts. And then with the fitness, it's the same thing. Cortisol patterns are changing. So first half of the cycle, resting cortisol level is lower. You can do cardio, you can do HIIT workouts, you can go to classes, you can push yourself really hard with that. Second half of the cycle, resting cortisol levels are higher. And again, that vulnerability around blood sugar stability is present in the luteal phase. So you want to do shorter workouts, like 30, 40 minutes. You want to be not fasted when you're doing a workout. So don't work out on an empty stomach. And you want to strength train, like just go lift heavy weights, go to the gym, use the machines, heavy. I would rather you do less reps and like max out on the weight than just be there for like 90 minutes, like, curling 5 pounds till you pass out. Like there's just no value in that. Yes, I understand time under tension, but if you want to build lean muscle, you've got to stress the muscle.
Hey everyone, popping in to say thank you to all of the amazing people who listen and watch this podcast. We're so grateful for each and every one of you and truly cannot say thank you enough for tuning in every single week.
In order for us to keep bringing you all great conversations and continue building our community and raising the bar, we're asking you for some simple and free support. Subscribe to our channel, follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts, and keep up with us on social at Thoughts May Vary Pod.
And if you're looking to dive even deeper, you can join our exclusive Patreon community and download Co-Create, our digital manifestation journal filled with over 150 prompts to help guide your curiosity and unlock new layers of yourself.
Thanks for being here.
I'm like about to cancel my hot Pilates class because I'm in my luteal phase. I'm like, oh, we're not going to that.
Yeah, no, that's too much. Hot Pilates? No. I love me Pilates in the luteal phase, but weighted Pilates, like that would be go do the reformer class. I either use my 6 plus my 3-pound ankle weights on one leg, or I'm doing my 6 and 6 on one leg. So I'm doing 12. I'm pushing up 12. Work those muscles. They're really, the more you do it, the better. And all that will help optimize your metabolism over the month. A study just came out 2 weeks ago, ladies.
Ooh.
So important. Again, showing the gender differences and why we are equal but need different biohacking, different self-care. So, forever the logic has been, well, women are probably just like smaller versions of dudes, and so they just probably need more cardio because they have extra body fat. So like that'll do it. Very scientific. Let's leave them out of the research, but like let's just make this assumption.
Right.
Yeah.
Super great. Well, it turns out that the vascular structure of women is more robust. What does that mean? It means you have better veins, more of them. They're better. In chapter 2, I kind of like outline all the ways the female body is like super powerful / better, whatever, however you want to interpret it. But men have a poorer vascular system. So actually it's men that need all this extreme cardio to support their heart health. We now know that women, because of this difference in our vascular system, we need 50% less cardio than men. So when I tell you to just cut the cardio out after ovulation, boom, there's your 50%. Go hard in the first half of the month if you want. And then in the second half, please refrain from jumping around. You can, of course, if you want, but you don't need the cardio. You need strength training to build that lean muscle that's going to fire your metabolism. And especially as you are aging through your 30s and into your 40s, that's super, super important. So that's the food and the fitness. The productivity piece is really fun because, we're taking advantage of like what's working easily, right? So
this is one of my favorite pieces. As the mental health girly, the focus piece has changed my workflow, how I operate, how I meet my emotions. Like this is one of the most critical pieces to me. I mean, they're all critical, but this is
They
like
build on them,
champion.
it's like a
Yes.
circuit, right? You
Yeah.
do them
Yeah.
all and you get benefits, but even if you do some, it still gives you benefits, which is it's
Totally.
why I love the method, and I think why so many women like it. It's very flexible. You do as
Yeah.
much as you can. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to like type A the situation, start with the
Right.
food, start with the fitness, start with the productivity. Wherever you feel called and pulled, do that first and then add the other layers in. It's a lifetime practice. So, it's really playing to your hormonal strengths cognitively. So, the ovulatory phase is an easy one because that surge of estrogen hyperstimulates verbal and social centers of the brain. So, if that's going on, it is only logical that you would select activities that take advantage of this extra
Mhm.
boost, right? Why not schedule an interview or a presentation or go to a networking event or go on a date or go out with friends or anything that allows you to really lean into your verbal and social centers. This is also very helpful for introverts.
Yes.
Um, if you're introverted, your ovulatory phase is really the only phase where you're going to feel okay with extroverted activities. And that's not going to cause a lot of stress on your nervous system, right?
Yeah.
Where you don't have to come home and do some like nervous system, vagus nerve resetting, right? Um, then, in the luteal phase, we have, which is by far and wide my favorite phase, even though it's the most maligned.
Tell us.
The
Please.
luteal phase is the best. Anybody who has been pregnant will tell you when you have progesterone like going wet at full strength. I mean, when I have been pregnant, the second trimester, when you're fully like your brain is just like bathed in so much progesterone, that is when I have written like, I mean, I have a folder and I remember I just filled it with several book proposals and outlines. The amount of mental focus and concentration that comes from progesterone has this calming and focusing effect on the brain. It's insane. It's so powerful. The problem is most of us don't experience it because, like I said, 80% of the population has PMS. What is PMS and why does it have to do with what we're talking about? PMS only exists with progesterone insufficiency.
Mm.
That's the only way it exists. So in the luteal phase, you're meant to have this like nice arc of estrogen and progesterone, but progesterone should be in greater concentration than estrogen,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and they both rise and fall. But that delta needs to be there, that correct ratio. The problem is it's typically inverted where we don't have enough progesterone and we have more estrogen, or we are more sensitive to the estrogen because we don't have enough progesterone to haircut that estrogenic effect. So instead of feeling focused and like you can just sit down and crush whatever it is that's on your to-do list, you feel moody, you feel brain foggy, you feel anxious, you feel tired, irritable, and and I've been there. Trust me, I have been
Mhm.
there. Having PCOS is kind of like when it's really full on. It's like being pseudo menopausal because you have low levels of your hormones. You just don't have access to the estrogen. You're not getting the social boost. You're not getting the concentration boost. That's why there's so much of a mental health aspect to PCOS compared to other menstrual disorders. Um, and it's frustrating. But it's also true of women who are going through perimenopause because in your 40s, it's a natural process that, estrogen and progesterone both start to decrease in concentration overall. But if you go into that with proper nourishment, you don't
Mhm.
have to have such a profound impact. You can actually still be making more progesterone than estrogen, and you don't have to have all the hot flashes and night sweats and mood swings and all those
Mhm.
things. So it's an important thing to understand that what you eat, how you care for your cycle has a direct impact on your ability to manufacture adequate levels of progesterone. And then you get all the benefits, which is
Mhm.
not just eliminating PMS, but it's this 10 to 12 days out of the month where you can just do stuff at such a rapid rate of, with your mind, with your creativity. And it's really important, especially for so many of us now are entrepreneurs, we're artists, we're
Mhm.
creating out of the ether, which is what women do. Let's just look at you as a female. Microcosmically, you are manufacturing an endometrium out of nothing every month, out of what you're eating, right? And similarly, You give birth and create things out of nothing,
Mhm.
out of your ideas all the time. Those things are absolutely connected,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
if you want to manifest more, if you want to create more, if you want to be up to things more, you need to be having a healthy cycle, period. I always intend that pun. And you want to be serious about it
Yeah.
because it is the foundation, it's the springboard from which you get to do shit in the world.
Yeah.
But if your cycle is not functioning optimally, you don't feel on your game. It's really hard.
Mhm.
And again, I've lived through the mental impact, the cognitive impact of having dysregulated hormones is so
Mm.
profound. I was not in my flow, feeling creative. I could barely string thoughts together. It was so difficult to have conversations, to be social, to study, to
Mhm.
get up in the morning. I mean, it's just, and
Mhm.
that's my experience with PCOS, but I know that's a lot of women's experience with perimenopause, with menopause, and with PMS, right? Where you feel like you're a different person half of the month and you lose time.
Mm.
How many of us as women have lost so much time just because we don't know how to take care of our hormones? It keeps me up at night. It is
Yeah.
unacceptable to me because I really do believe that women are the greatest force of creative energy on this planet. And I am absolutely invested in making sure that as many of us as possible have access to that full potential because, you know, no big deal. Like it would be great if we all just like fixed all the things and made the world a better place. And
I mean, we could.
I think that'd be super dope.
I completely agree. And I'll tell you when I don't have PCOS, but when I felt the most disconnected from myself and unlike myself was when every doctor around me said, "Well, the answer to your problems is birth control," and put me on a pill, different pills for over 10 years. And I
How
used to make the joke.
interesting though, because birth control is known to be problematic for mental health. So
Oh my
much so
god.
that like, it's very common to have to onboard an antidepressant
Right.
alongside birth control to deal with, because why is it so destabilizing to mood? You are suppressing all that estrogen.
Mhm.
Estrogen is this happy hormone. you know it's a feel good hormone. It's the positive, the social, the the lubricant hormone, and I mean that from a
Right.
Yeah.
social point of view. When you suppress that in a young person, you really zap their joy you know
And it
That's how I
changed the way I
felt.
made decisions. Like, my
Yeah.
biggest joke in college was, I can have acne and be nice, or I can be gorgeous and a bitch. And I think it, like, depending on what birth control I was on. And I think it would have changed what partners I pick,
Of
who I
course.
dated. It would affect how I would go to class. Like, it really, like, warped who I was when it was fed to me as like, "Oh, well, the only solution to your problems is to mask all of that." And
Mhm.
it was just unbelievable to me the second getting off of it. I mean, there was a little bit of a transition there, and by a little bit, I mean like 6 to 8 months because I was on it for over a decade.
Yeah.
But the way I felt so at home, the way I felt empowered, the way I felt kinder, the way I looked back, I was a jealous person in relationships all throughout being on the pill, and I
Interesting.
stopped taking the pill and in a relationship and was like, "Whoa." Like, what was that perspective? It felt like taking off glasses.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
studies definitely show that you are not the same person
Mhm.
cognitively when you're on that
You taught me
medication.
this.
So it's your lived experience is pretty common, but it's so um, disregarded and
Yeah.
dismissed
Mhm.
Yeah.
that you think it's only happening to you. You
Right.
think that's what gaslighting does. It's like, well, it must
Yeah.
be me, right? I guess I should just suck it up or
Yeah.
Yep.
stop thinking about the fact that there's something wrong here. Probably it's not. You get confused, you
Yep.
get turned around. Your natural instinct to say, hey, I don't feel right, is really undercut. And that's, I think, again, backtracking into, how do we how do we shift this whole experience? Well, I think it really does start with educating younger girls. What do you do when something's up with your symptoms? It's like cooking, right? Medications are there. Sometimes they're even necessary. In the meantime, until you get there, like salt in cooking, you can always
Mhm.
add more, but once you put the salt in, it's hard to take it out,
Yeah.
right? So,
Mhm.
how can we start with something simple? What are you doing that might be contributing to this issue? For example, are you staying up late as a teenager and that's making you
Mhm.
tired and anxious the next day? Or are you going with your friends to have like the third Kappa Frappa latte, in the afternoon. The half-life of caffeine is pretty significant. 50% of the population walks around with the gene variation. That means they don't break down caffeine. And so then you have caffeine toxicity, which you can look up on the Mayo Clinic's website. One of the biggest symptoms is anxiety. So many girls have anxiety that is really dietarily induced. So let's change diet. Let's play around. Let's be experimental. What happens if we don't have the Kappa Frappa latte? What happens if we add a fish oil? What happens if we change the sleep routine? Do we feel better? Do we feel different? Do we need more things, more supplements? Do we need the medication? But that could be the last stop on the train as opposed to the first destination. And I think if we shift that narrative, whether it's mental health, whether it's PMS, whether it's acne, if we get younger girls thinking about, well, what else can I do before I, do this big, big deal thing with medication? We'd have a whole generation of women who didn't have to recover from the experience of being on medication and starting their lives at that point. It's a lot of time.
Thank you guys so much for listening to part 1 of our conversation with Alisa Vitti. As we mentioned in the introduction, this was just half of it. So make sure that you tune in on Monday of next week for part 2. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed today's episode.
How's it going, y'all? It's Aaron. Don't let your Monday suck. Don't have those Sunday scaries. I'm tired of everybody waking up in the week saying, shit, it's Monday. You know what goes down? TMV releases every week on Mondays. Make sure you rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching YouTube, yes, TMV has a YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and ring that noti bell and never miss a thing. And also, join the TMV Familia by joining the Thoughts May Vary Patreon and by following @Thoughts May Vary Pod on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you for listening.
Great.
There you go.
Thanks, AB.
Got y'all.